to Women in Pursuit of God's Heart. I'm Sharina. Today I want to welcome a special guest. Her name is Carly, and she's going to be sharing with you today her journey to motherhood. She has 7 kids, and here she is to tell her story.
Hi guys, my name is Carly. I have been really good friends with Sharina for a long time. I'm probably since junior high, maybe? I don't know, like 20 years, which makes us really old. So
I'm going to add some pictures of that in there.
Perfect. I am excited to be here today and to share part of my foster and adoption story with you guys. I know Sharina shared her story a little while ago, and we have some similar stories, but some very different experiences as well. So I was initially interested in adoption. Actually, in the 2nd grade, there was a girl in my class who was adopted, and that was what first sparked an interest in my heart for adoption. So when my husband and I started dating, and it seemed like he might be the one, I said, I'm going to adopt one day. So if you're on board with that, then you can work, this relationship might work out. If you're not on board with that, well, then you're not the man for me. So he was like, fine. Like, I had never really thought about adoption, but I'm not opposed to it at all. So we decided one day we would adopt. So just a few weeks, actually, after we were married, we were sitting in church, and there was a announcement in the bulletin that said that Clark County was super desperate for foster parents at the time, and that they were trying to recruit from the faith-based community. So we talked in the car after church that day about foster care, and we had never really considered foster care. We didn't know actually very much about it at all, but we thought, well, we'll go to this informational meeting and just see what happens. So that was 10 years ago. We went to an info session, and the only time ever in the history of the Department of Family Services, they were so desperate that they combined 10 weeks of classes down to 2 weekends. So we went to an info session on Friday night, and then all day Saturday, all day Sunday attended classes, and then the following weekend, all day Saturday, all day Sunday attended classes. So when we started this journey, it was only maybe 3 months into our marriage, and we thought, well, the process to be certified to be a foster parent is really long. We probably have at least a year before we become parents, before we actually bring kids home. So we thought that would give us a good adjustment period, but we didn't know going into it that we were doing this condensed version of classes. So 5 months after we were married, there was a licensing worker in our home doing our final home inspection, and she was there probably about 3 hours, and she said, do you guys have any questions? Is there anything that I can answer for you? Everything looks really great in your home. We were like, wow, this is like really fast. We didn't at all think that this was going to happen at this rapid of a pace. And she was like, well, everything looks great. Like, your license will be in the mail. Are you sure you don't have any questions? So we're like, no. And she pulled a piece of paper out of her pocket, and on that paper there was 3 sibling groups of 4 listed. And she said, all 3 of these sibling groups are sitting at Child Haven waiting to be placed together. You guys have space to take 4 kids. Like, would you be interested in any of these groups? And my husband and I looked at each other and we were like, this lady's crazy. We have never parented before. We have a dog that I hate. We can barely keep our plants alive, and they want to give us 4 kids. So we thought, well, do we have to tell you right now? This was on a Thursday. And she said, you don't have to tell me right now. She gave me the letter or the phone number to the woman in placement and said, you can call Jericho in placement and let her know when you guys are ready. So she left our home that Thursday evening, and we spent 24 hours doing all of the godly things, seeking wise biblical counsel, and everyone was like, whatever you do, don't take 4 kids for your first placement. Like, that's a crazy thing to do. But we just really felt specifically drawn to this one sibling group. So on the paper, all that was listed was a 7-month-old boy, a 2-year-old girl, a 3-year-old boy, and a 5-year-old boy. And on the paper it said Spanish speaking only, which I don't speak any Spanish, but John fluently speaks Spanish. So we thought, well, one parent that speaks your language is better than none. And I figured you can communicate enough with a kid, even if you don't speak the same language, to know if they're hungry or if they need something. So we decided on Friday morning that we were going to take this sibling group of 4. Even though everyone said not to, we really felt God was calling us to these 4 specific kids. So I mustered up all the courage I had, and I called Jericho in placement, and I said, we're interested in taking the Martinez kids. So she looks at their file, and she says, oh, I'm really sorry. We already placed those kids with another family this morning. And I was crushed. I felt like, man, you have just told me these kids have been sitting on Child Haven campus for weeks waiting to be placed together. We finally got the courage to say yes to these kids. We felt like God was calling us to these specific kids, and then they're gone. And so Jericho said, don't worry about it. Like, just enjoy your weekend. We'll call you Monday with another placement. So all weekend long, John and I were like, man, are we even doing what God has called us to do? Like, we felt like we were stepping out in faith, but maybe we're just crazy. So Monday morning, I'm sitting at my desk, and the Department of Family Services calls, and it was Jericho and Placement. And she said, I have a sibling group of 4 if you guys are interested. And I was like, man, I thought we dodged that bullet. And she said, no, I'll give you as many details as we have. I was like, okay. So I got a piece of paper and a pen and started jotting down everything she was telling me. And she said it was a 7-month-old boy, a 2-year-old girl, a 3-year-old boy, and a 5-year-old boy. And I thought, what are the odds that it's the same exact ages and genders that I had called about last week? So I asked if their last name was Martinez, and she said yes. And I said, I called about those kids on Friday, and they had already been placed in another home. And she said, oh, they were, and we had to remove them from that home because there was an issue with their license. And I was like, okay, God, like if there was any doubt in my mind before that these are the kids that we were supposed to have, like you have definitely put that all at ease. So that was on a Monday. We went Tuesday to meet them at Child Haven. And we walked onto the Child Haven campus, and at the time they had siblings in cottages together, but infants or special needs kids were in a different cottage. So we walked onto the baby cottage, and there was probably 30 or 35 babies on campus at the time, which was heartbreaking. But there's only one out of all of those kids that was screaming his head off. And I, in my head, said, Lord, I'll take any kid except for that one. And they were like, here he is. And that was the kid that was screaming his head off. But as soon as we started holding him, he was fine. And they brought the 3 siblings over. And Zoe, who was 2 at the time, she looked just like Dora. I mean, she had like white high-top tennis shoes on and little pigtail braids. And I was like, oh my gosh, these kids are so cute. So we played with them for probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And we left Jackson at the infant cottage, took the other 3 back to their sibling cottage and helped them get ready for dinner. And we felt like, okay, like these kids are going to be a good match for our family, and potentially we can, love on them and care for them until they're ready to go back to their birth family. And so we got down on Jose's 5-year-old level at the time and said, hey, bud, how would you feel about coming home with us for a little while? And I thought he was going to be super excited, and he was silent. And I thought, man, we just had so much fun. We played basketball, and we built Legos, and we did all this stuff that if I was 5, I would want my parent to do with me. And all of a sudden, he broke the silence and said, I will only come with you if my baby brother can come too. And it was at that point that I realized how bonded they were as a family unit, and that was why the judge was insistent on them being placed together. And so we said, of course, bud, you guys can all come. And he said, okay. So we went home that day, and as far as the Department of Family Services was concerned, we had 2 empty bedrooms, so we had space to take in 4 kids, but we didn't have any stuff. So we just sent out emails and some text messages and just said, hey, we're bringing home these 4 kids tomorrow. We have nothing. We'll take your hand-me-down, whatever. And it was incredible to watch in 24 hours. God just provided. We went from having nothing to having 2 twin beds and 2 cribs and 3 car seats and 2 high chairs and clothes and toys. And it was amazing. Like, strangers were literally driving and dropping stuff off at our house. So the next day was Wednesday, and we went in 2 cars to Child Haven because we didn't even have one car big enough to fit 4 kids, and just said, okay, Lord, we're just doing this for as long as you have these kids in our lives. So the day that we brought them home was a day shy of us being married for 5 months. So we brought these 4 kids home, and it was an incredibly hard journey, but made me realize my need for Jesus more than anything ever in my life has. We brought them home with the goal being reunification, and later found out they had been in the foster care system for a very long time, since our oldest was only 9 months old. And so they had some visits with their biological family, and over the course of 2 years, it was a very on-again, off-again situation. It seemed like at one point we were heading towards reunification. At one point we were heading towards adoption, and it was kind of like, well, Lord, I'm just going to love these kids and serve these kids today, and then wake up and do it again tomorrow. And that's all I can worry about at this point, because it was incredibly overwhelming, the thought of not knowing how long they were going to be with us for. So in that time, we had 1 biological child. He was born about a year and a couple of months after we brought home those 4. So Benjamin, our first biological son, was born. He had these 3 brothers and a sister that you could not tell him that they are not his siblings. They've been there since the day he was born. So 2 years later, our adoption was final with those 4 kids, and we thought, okay, Lord, we have 5 kids. This is not at all how we thought our journey was going to go. We thought we would foster and kids would reunify, and John and I would have some time alone, and then we'd foster again, and they'd reunify, and we thought eventually we would adopt, but we had no clue that it would be these first 4 kids that we brought home. So we thought, okay, Lord, what is it that you have for our future now? And we thought, okay, we could foster teen moms. I felt like I was a stay-at-home mom at this point, and I thought, well, I could invest into teen moms and kind of give them an example that they wouldn't otherwise have. So our next placement was a 15-year-old girl, and she had an 8-month-old baby, and they were both placed with us. And to say that that was a disaster is kind of an understatement. We had some really great moments with her where I felt like we were really having breakthroughs, and we had been told when she came home with us that she was a chronic runner, that she typically tended to stay in a foster home about 2 weeks until she would run away, which to me that was a challenge. I was determined that I was going to adopt this girl because there was no way she was going to run away from our home after 2 weeks. We made it to 9 weeks, which was quite an accomplishment as far as the department was concerned, but she did end up running away. And you would find in a lot of cases with teens in foster care that they have been so damaged and so abused and so hurt that they really want to hurt you before you have the opportunity to hurt them. So I think she had started to get to a point where she was very comfortable in our family, and she was almost holding her breath for when we were going to send her away or give her back. And because we hadn't done that, she thought her defense mechanism was that she was going to run away before we had the opportunity to essentially give up on her. So she left our family, and we realized through that 9 weeks that Jose, our oldest son, really identified as the oldest child. And so for us, it was going to be very important to keep birth order. So at that point, Benjamin was 15 months old. So we said we would take anything from a newborn to a 12-month-old. And our next call was a 13-day-old baby girl who was heavily drug exposed, and she was detoxing in the hospital, and would we be willing to pick her up and help her through the rest of the detox process. So we went and picked her up from the hospital. At 13 days old, she weighed just about 4 pounds. She was full term, but she had an incredibly low birth weight because of her drug exposure. And she detoxed on methadone for the first 3 months that we had her. And it was everything you see in the movies with a grown adult detoxing, except for in a tiny 4-pound baby. So she would scream, she would tremor, she wouldn't sleep at all. And that was a really rough period. So our oldest child at the time was 7. And we had a total of 5 children, including Sophia, who we had just brought home from the hospital. And then I found out I was pregnant. So I had morning sickness. I had this detoxing baby. I had these 5 other kids. And I was like, Jesus, I don't know why you thought I was the right girl for this job, but you were wrong. And it was really through that God proved his goodness to me, and not only through somehow sustaining me through that process, sustaining our whole family, but also just sending people at just the right time when I needed it. There would always be someone that would show up, whether it was to give me a nap or to let me go to the grocery store by myself, or just with a word of encouragement. And I think that was really the time when I found the value in our foster care and adoption community of people that we lived with, just not feeling alone. And we were in a much different place when we brought the 4 older kids home, because we didn't have any other kids in our home to worry about. So they were our only concern. But at this point, we had a whole plethora of kids. So Sophie was with us. The goal was reunification. She had a lot of interaction with her birth family, and we just thought, okay, we're just going to love her and care for her until her birth family is in a good place to get her back. And 2.5 years later, we ended up adopting her. So her birth family was not able to get healthy and to get clean, so she needed an adoptive resource. And at that point, she was about 1.5 years old. Our youngest biological daughter was born at that point, and we thought, okay, she's been a part of our family for this long. She's definitely meant to be with us and meant to be a Souza. So she was with us for 2.5 years before her adoption was final. So at that point, we had 7 children, 3 girls, 4 boys, and the oldest was 9. And we thought, okay, Lord, we know that the call to be involved in foster care and adoption has not gone away, but it's definitely going to look differently. I was at a place where not only was our car maxed out, and we could definitely not fit another car seat in our 9-passenger vehicle, but that I was just mentally and emotionally capped out for sure. So we thought, okay, we will not be taking any more kids into our home at this point. We made a really hard decision to close our license, which was quite a hefty decision, but we thought, well, maybe if God has plans for us to reopen in the future, then we'll do that. But we, at that point, transitioned our focus to then recruiting and supporting as many other godly foster and adoptive parents as possible. So that's where we are today. I run a foster and adoption support group at our church, and work very closely with the county to try to bridge the gap between the faith-based community and the Department of Family Services, and there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening with that right now. And if you would like to be a part of that, I would love for you to reach out to me. My email address is Carly.Souza@gmail.com, Carly.Souza@gmail.com. And I can let you know when we have our next info session or our next training classes on our church campus, or even just other ways that you can be involved if you don't feel like you are at a place where you can foster or adopt yourself.
Welcome to Women in Pursuit of God's Heart.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's
Oh,
it.
that was easy peasy.
You just hit that.